Manhattan, New York. 1:23 p.m. Thursday, October 8, 1964. The autumn air inside City Hall carried the scent of marble dust and old money, thick with the kind of silence that only comes from centuries of buried secrets. Mayor Robert "Bobby" Calloway sat behind a desk carved from Honduran mahogany, his manicured fingers drumming against leather that cost more than most Harlem families earned in 6 months. The telephone on his desk, black Bakelite pristine, had been ringing for exactly 47 seconds. His secretary, Margaret, a woman whose face had been carved by decades of deciding which voices mattered and which didn't, held the receiver like it was contaminated. "It's him again, Mr. Mayor. The one from 125th Street. Calloway didn't look up from the urban renewal proposal he was pretending to read. The document outlined the systematic demolition of 12 blocks in Harlem, displacement disguised as progress, profit wrapped in the language of public safety. He waved his hand in that casual dismissal that powerful men perfect over lifetimes of never being told no. Tell Mr. Johnson that this office doesn't negotiate with criminals. Tell him his community center permits are permanently revoked. Tell him that if he calls this number again, I'll have the district attorney's office audit every business on Lenox Avenue." Margaret's lips curved into something approximating satisfaction. She delivered the message with the practiced cruelty of someone who had spent 30 years gatekeeping power. On the other end of that line, 5 miles north in a narrow office above Coleman's restaurant, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood motionless. He wore a charcoal suit tailored on Savile Row, Italian leather shoes that reflected the afternoon light streaming through Venetian blinds, and an expression that would have made Margaret reconsider her tone if she could see it. The silence after her message lasted exactly 6 seconds. Then Bumpy spoke, his voice carrying the temperature of January steel. "Tell the mayor he has 48 hours to reconsider his position." The line went dead. Margaret laughed as she replaced the receiver, already forming an anecdote about the audacity of Harlem gangsters for the mayor's amusement. Calloway chuckled, signed his demolition order, and moved on to lunch at the Union Club. Neither understood what had just transpired. Neither knew that Bumpy Johnson didn't make threats, he made promises. And in 47 hours and 37 minutes, Robert Calloway would be standing before a wall of newspaper photographers, watching his political career incinerate in real time, unable to explain the photographs being distributed to every major news outlet in New York City. The images, taken 18 months earlier during a private weekend at the Hamptons, showed the mayor in a hotel suite with 2 women who weren't his wife and a suitcase full of cash being handed to him by Vincent the Chin Gigante. The timestamps were visible. The context was damning. The source was untraceable. But everyone in New York's underworld knew exactly who had been holding those photographs, waiting for the precise moment when a man's arrogance would justify their release. Calloway had forgotten the fundamental rule of power in New York: respect wasn't negotiable, and disrespect carried compound interest. By Saturday morning, his wife would file for separation. By Monday, federal investigators would open a racketeering probe. By Wednesday, his own party would demand his resignation. The mayor, who refused to take a phone call from Bumpy Johnson, lost his marriage, his reputation, and his political future in less time than it takes to develop a photograph. Through it all, Bumpy Johnson never made a public statement, never claimed credit, never raised his voice. He simply returned to his routine, walking 125th Street in his tailored suits, nodding to shopkeepers, reminding everyone who actually controlled the community they lived in. The story of how Mayor Calloway's career ended in 60 seconds is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to October 6, 1964, 48 hours before the call that changed everything. October 6, 1964. Harlem woke to machinery chewing through brick and memory, progress spelled out in eviction notices and red tags stamped with deadlines that felt like sentences. The city called it urban renewal, but on the streets between 110th and 155th, residents had a different name: Negro removal. It was systematic displacement designed to clear prime real estate for developers who viewed the neighborhood as a spreadsheet of potential profit. Wrecking balls swung where children had played stickball, and white men in clean shoes walked Lenox Avenue, marking addresses in leather notebooks with the precision of executioners. At the center of this architectural violence stood Mayor Robert Calloway, a man who preached progress from City Hall steps while his signature authorized the erasure of 3,000 families. But the betrayal that morning wasn't about zoning laws or demolition crews. It was personal, financial, and a violation of the only contract that mattered in the underworld. 5 blocks from the nearest demolition, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat at his mahogany desk above Coleman's restaurant. The morning paper lay folded before him, delivered at precisely 6:15 as it had been for 11 years. His scarred hands moved with surgical precision as he unfolded the New York Times to page 3. Below the fold, the headline existed specifically to humiliate: Mayor cracks down on Harlem crime boss, community center permits revoked. 6 weeks earlier, Bumpy had paid $75,000 as a consultation fee to secure construction permits for the 125th Street Youth Development Center. The cash had been delivered in a briefcase, counted, accepted, and vanished into campaign coffers. The community center represented 18 months of architectural planning and Bumpy's calculated transition from pure criminal enterprise into something that served Harlem's children while laundering money through legitimate construction contracts. Calloway had taken the bribe, kept the cash, then used the project's rejection as campaign ammunition, positioning himself as the law and order candidate who cracked down on organized crime. Most men would have thrown furniture, made threats that felt satisfying but accomplished nothing. Bumpy Johnson had never been most men. He set the newspaper down with controlled movement, the same precision he used before executing permanent solutions to temporary problems. His lieutenant Marcus stood near the door, reading his boss's silence like a seismologist reads tremors before an earthquake. Bumpy's voice, when it came, carried the temperature of a morgue drawer. How long have we had the Hampton photographs? The surveillance network had been Bumpy's masterpiece, built systematically over 2 decades. Photographers positioned as bellhops in hotels where politicians believed discretion was guaranteed. Informants working as bartenders in clubs where business deals happened after midnight. Secretaries who understood that loyalty to Harlem paid better than loyalty to bureaucrats who viewed them as furniture. His intelligence operation made FBI surveillance look amateur by comparison. 18 months, boss, March of '63. Bumpy walked to the steel filing cabinet against the eastern wall, fingers moving across the combination dial with muscle memory. The cabinet contained 23 manila envelopes, each marked with a name and the single word: insurance. He withdrew the envelope labeled insurance. R. Calloway, feeling the weight of 8 by 10 photographs inside. The images spread across his desk like evidence in a murder trial. Mayor Calloway accepting cash from Vincent Gigante. Calloway with women who weren't his wife. Calloway signing documents worth millions to Gigante's construction companies. Timestamps visible. Context undeniable. Source untraceable. Bumpy studied them with the detached interest of a chess master reviewing his opponent's exposed king. No satisfaction showed on his face, just calculation. He had waited 18 months for the precise moment when these images would inflict maximum damage. 48 hours, he said, his tone flat as a verdict. If he wants to play in public, we'll give him a public execution. March 1963. The Hampton Hotel sat 70 miles from Manhattan like a fortress of assumed immunity, where powerful men confused geography with invisibility. White columns and private beaches created the illusion that distance could insulate corruption from consequences. Politicians conducted business they couldn't conduct in the city. Mob figures met with officials they couldn't be photographed with in public. Everyone assumed safety lay in separation from witnesses. Marcus Williams had worked the Hamptons' 3rd floor for 2 years, pushing luggage carts while operating the most sophisticated surveillance network outside federal law enforcement. His uniform made him invisible to guests who never looked at the help, never wondered why a young black man seemed to work every VIP floor regardless of shift schedule. The modified Leica camera hidden in his maintenance cart had documented 17 corrupt transactions, each photograph filed in Bumpy Johnson's steel cabinet, like ammunition waiting for the right war. The weekend of March 15th delivered evidence that would remain dormant for 18 months. Mayor Calloway arrived Friday evening, accompanied by two women whose professional relationship to him had nothing to do with municipal governance. Vincent the Chin Gigante arrived separately, carrying a briefcase that Marcus recognized from experience. The photographs Marcus captured through a service corridor window showed everything. Calloway accepting bundled cash across a hotel suite table. Documents spread between them detailing zoning changes that would redirect millions in construction contracts to Gigante's companies. The escorts visible in frame, establishing context that destroyed any claim of legitimate business. Timestamps from the hotel's lobby clock providing irrefutable chronology. When the negatives reached Harlem, Bumpy studied them without comment, then did something terrifying. Nothing. Most criminals would have used the evidence immediately, demanding quick payoffs or immediate leverage. Bumpy understood that information was merely potential energy. Timing transformed it into a weapon of complete destruction. For 18 months, he watched Calloway's career ascend while holding the ammunition to destroy it. Watched him give speeches about law and order while protecting officers who brutalized Harlem residents. Every complaint of police violence filed by black families landed on Calloway's desk, where it died in inactive files. 3 teenagers beaten unconscious during a traffic stop. A grandmother thrown down precinct stairs, her collarbone shattered. A shopkeeper hospitalized after refusing to pay protection money to corrupt officers. Calloway wasn't just taking bribes. He was the primary shield for systematic violence against Harlem, enabling brutality by ensuring investigations never proceeded. This transformed the Hampton photographs from leverage into obligation. Personal revenge was expensive and temporary. Removing a structural threat to community safety served a larger purpose. Violence would have been simpler, but murder created martyrs and invited federal investigations. Public humiliation accomplished permanent removal while demonstrating to every politician that disrespecting Harlem carried consequences more devastating than death. Bumpy chose systematic destruction over physical brutality because he understood that for men like Calloway, loss of status was a fate worse than the grave. October 9th, 1964. The Yale Club on Vanderbilt Avenue, neutral territory where power brokers met without acknowledging they were meeting. Bumpy sat with 3 newspaper editors, spreading the Hampton photographs across white linen like a dealer revealing a royal flush. The editors studied the images in silence, understanding immediately what they represented. Bumpy's voice carried no emotion, just mathematical certainty. These will be available to all of you simultaneously at 2 p.m. Saturday, or to none of you ever. No exclusives. Everyone reports the truth, or everyone stays silent. Choose wisely. The threat was implicit but absolute. Refusing meant losing access to every story that mattered in Harlem, becoming irrelevant in a city where relevance was currency. All 3 editors agreed within minutes, understanding that defying City Hall was survivable, but refusing Bumpy Johnson was not. October 8th, 1964. Morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting precise shadows across Bumpy Johnson's office like the bars of a courtroom cage. He dressed with the methodical care of a surgeon preparing for an operation that required flawless execution. The charcoal suit from his Savile Row tailor, selected because dark wool photographed with authority in newspaper images. Every detail calculated for the aftermath, because men who orchestrate public executions understand that presentation matters as much as evidence. At 12:58 p.m., he walked into his office above Coleman's restaurant and positioned himself at the desk. The telephone waited at the exact center, heavy, official, city-issued. He had arranged for the line to be easily traceable, registered to the business address. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline, there would be no ambiguity about who initiated contact or from where. He was creating a record, not hiding from one. At exactly 1 p.m., he lifted the receiver and dialed City Hall. 32 seconds later, Margaret's voice arrived sharp and efficient. Office of Mayor Calloway. Ellsworth Johnson calling for Mayor Calloway. Regarding the community center permits. Her pause lasted 47 seconds, loaded with recognition and contempt. Her tone cooled to Arctic temperatures. The mayor is extremely busy, Mr. Johnson. He doesn't involve himself in criminal enterprises masquerading as community projects. The insult carried layers: criminal, masquerading, the suggestion that Harlem's attempts at legitimacy were theater for fools. Bumpy's voice never shifted from its measured calm. Put him on the line. Paper shuffled. A hand covered the receiver. Low murmurs. Then Calloway's voice arrived, dripping with confidence and racial condescension. Mr. Johnson, I thought my office made our position clear. The permits are revoked. The city won't be bullied into legitimizing your operations. You're a criminal. You don't get to talk about respect. And let me be very clear. If you contact this office again, I'll have the district attorney and the heirs crawling through every storefront you touch. The contempt sat just beneath the language, the confidence of a white mayor certain that a black gangster's rage would die in the shadows. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. You have 48 hours to reconsider your position. The line went dead. 48 hours from 1:01 p.m. landed at 1:01 p.m. Saturday, when weekend editions would hit maximum circulation with minimum time for counterattack. At 1:15 p.m., Bumpy walked 3 blocks to Morrison Photography Studio on 135th Street. 12 manila envelopes waited on the counter, each containing complete photographic documentation of the Hampton Hotel weekend. The distribution plan operated with military precision. One envelope delivered to the Times City desk by a taxi driver, another to the post via messenger service. The FBI field office received theirs through a law firm's courier. Calloway's party leadership found theirs on the chairman's vehicle seat. His wife's personal attorney discovered the final copy in morning mail. 12 envelopes, 12 different messengers, all arriving within a precise 2-hour window Friday morning. Nothing traceable to Bumpy except the mathematical impossibility that such coordination could be coincidence. Friday evening, 6:47 p.m., exactly 36 hours after dismissing Bumpy's call. Mayor Calloway sat in his study, nursing scotch, when his private line rang. His chief of staff's voice trembled with terror. Sir, you need to come to City Hall immediately. The Times has photographs. So does the Post. Everyone. They're demanding comment before tomorrow's edition. Calloway gripped the receiver, ice clinking in his glass. What photographs? 8 seconds of silence followed, an eternity of understanding. The aide couldn't answer, which told Calloway everything. His hand shook as he hung up, scotch trembling against crystal, finally comprehending that dismissing a Harlem phone call had triggered his own systematic destruction. Saturday, October 10th, 1964. At precisely 6 a.m., newspapers hit stands across New York like synchronized artillery strikes. Delivery trucks fanned through 5 boroughs carrying identical ammunition with varying headlines, each paper leading with photographs that required no editorial interpretation. The coordination was surgical, leaving no room for Calloway to control narrative or negotiate with individual outlets. The Times ran clinical brutality above the fold, Mayor Calloway photographed in cash exchange with mob figure. The Post chose visceral destruction, City Hall corruption exposed, mayor's secret Hampton meetings. The Daily News selected mathematical simplicity, caught. Every front page displayed the same evidence. Calloway accepting bundled cash from Vincent Gigante, hotel suite luxury visible in frame, timestamps irrefutable. At 7:15 a.m., Eleanor Calloway stood in her Westchester kitchen, coffee forgotten as she stared at newspapers her housekeeper had arranged beside breakfast. The photographs showed her husband with women she didn't recognize in circumstances requiring no explanation. She walked upstairs without speaking, began removing clothes from closets with mechanical precision. By 7:45, 3 suitcases sat packed in the foyer. At 8:30 a.m., the FBI field office issued a terse statement announcing federal investigation into municipal corruption and racketeering. The language was careful, bureaucratic. But the implication was absolute. This wouldn't end with embarrassment. Criminal charges were inevitable. Calloway's disastrous press conference began at 10:45 a.m. in City Hall's Blue Room. His prepared statement about doctored photographs and criminal conspiracies dissolved under questioning. Sweat darkened his collar. His hands shook holding notes he couldn't read through panic. When asked if he'd been at Hampton Hotel in March 1963, his denial came 3 seconds too late to be believable. By noon, 3 witnesses had contacted newspapers confirming Calloway's presence at Hampton that weekend. A hotel manager, a valet, a restaurant server who remembered the mayor's distinctive voice. The verification crushed any remaining claim of fabrication. At 2:30 p.m., party leadership convened emergency meeting in Midtown office. No press, no records. The chairman delivered ultimatum with clinical efficiency: resign immediately or face public expulsion and complete withdrawal of party support. Throughout this systematic destruction, Bumpy Johnson maintained his Saturday routine with deliberate visibility. At 9 a.m., he sat in Coleman's barbershop on 125th Street, receiving his weekly trim while neighborhood men discussed morning headlines. Several approached with newspapers, asking if he'd seen news about the mayor who'd revoked his permits. His response never varied: "I don't follow politics. I just protect my community." At 1:30 p.m., he played chess in Marcus Garvey Park, moving pieces with the same measured calculation he'd used to orchestrate Calloway's destruction. People passed with knowing glances, understanding what had happened without it being stated. Respect in Harlem wasn't about acknowledgement, it was about comprehension. Sunday evening, 6:15 p.m., Calloway's chief of staff appeared unannounced at Bumpy's brownstone on Strivers Row, escorted inside by bodyguards who moved with the silence of pallbearers. The aide stood in Bumpy's study, exhausted, desperate, delivering his message with the defeated tone of a man negotiating surrender. "The mayor will take your meeting now. He'll reconsider the permits. He'll approve the community center. He'll do whatever you want." Bumpy set down his evening newspaper, studying the aide with the detached interest of an entomologist examining a dying insect. His response arrived cold and final. "Tell the mayor I don't negotiate with men who hang up on me. Tell him to enjoy his retirement." Monday, October 12, 1964. At 9 a.m., Mayor Robert Calloway stepped to the podium in City Hall's Blue Room, delivering what amounted to his own political eulogy. His prepared statement lasted 4 minutes, carefully worded by attorneys to avoid criminal admissions while announcing he would not seek re-election. The language spoke of pursuing other opportunities and spending time with family, but everyone understood the translation. His career had been executed in public, and this was merely the official death certificate. Tuesday brought domestic collapse. Eleanor Calloway's attorney filed separation papers in Westchester County Court, citing irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. The legal phrasing was clinical, but the message was visceral. She wasn't just leaving him, she was disavowing him. The photographs had destroyed his private sanctuary as effectively as his public office. Wednesday, federal investigators expanded their probe beyond Calloway's personal corruption, following money trails like bloodhounds. Like cockroaches fleeing sudden light, corruption scattered throughout City Hall. 5 senior officials resigned within 48 hours: the deputy commissioner of buildings, 2 zoning board members, the chief of licensing, and a procurement director. They cited personal reasons and family obligations, but everyone understood they were running before their own insurance files surfaced in manila envelopes. The systematic investigation revealed what Harlem residents had known for years: the entire municipal apparatus was designed to extract wealth from the powerless and redistribute it to the connected. Zoning fraud, construction kickbacks, and bribery networks infected city government like rot through timber. Within 7 days, Calloway's interim successor quietly approved permits for the 125th Street Youth Development Center. No consultation fees required, no delays, just signatures executed with the swift efficiency of someone terrified of becoming the next headline. Harlem watched and understood. Nobody spoke Bumpy Johnson's name in connection with the mayor's fall, yet anonymous deliveries began arriving at his brownstone. Expensive bouquets. Handwritten notes thanking him for community service. The neighborhood recognized that the machinery of their oppression had been dismantled not through voting, but through leverage and systematic humiliation. A new unspoken rule settled over municipal offices with the weight of law. City officials began returning calls from Harlem community leaders within hours. Zoning complaints received immediate attention. Police precincts suddenly investigated assaults they previously ignored. The bureaucracy had learned a terrifying lesson. Disrespect carried consequences more devastating than accommodation. Calloway's final public appearance came 2 weeks later at his resignation ceremony. His speech was bitter, filled with veiled references to criminal elements manipulating politics and dark forces undermining democracy. He stood at the podium looking small, angry, and irrelevant. Everyone knew exactly who he meant by criminal elements. Nobody cared about his complaints. 3 months later, January 1965, a manila envelope arrived at Bumpy's office, hand-delivered by city courier. Inside was a single photograph, new Mayor Patterson shaking Bumpy's hand at a community event, both men smiling genuinely. Attached was a handwritten note on official stationery. "Mr. Johnson, my office is always available for community concerns. Respectfully, Mayor Patterson." Bumpy studied the image, noting the firm grip and public acknowledgement of his status. He filed the photograph in his steel cabinet, then retrieved the Hampton Hotel negatives from their secure location. Walking to his fireplace, he fed them into flames one strip at a time. The evidence was no longer necessary. Respect, once taught through systematic humiliation, tended to endure. Mathematics, as always, had proven exact. 6 decades separate us from October 1964, yet the Calloway incident remains embedded in Harlem's collective memory like mathematical proof carved in stone. The physical evidence has vanished, Coleman's restaurant demolished, the brownstone on Strivers Row sold to strangers, the Hampton Hotel renovated beyond recognition. But in barbershops and backrooms, the story endures not as history but as urban legend, its specifics blurred by time, yet its lesson preserved with surgical precision. The details shift in retelling. Some place the hotel in Atlantic City instead of the Hamptons. Others misquote the timeline or confuse the newspaper headlines. But the core equation never changes. One mayor disrespected Bumpy Johnson, and within days his entire life collapsed in public. The mathematics of that transaction became legend because it demonstrated a fundamental truth about power that official histories couldn't acknowledge. Bumpy's broader philosophy operated on principles most criminals never understood. Violence was temporary, loud, and invited federal investigations. Information was permanent, silent, and compounded interest over time. The Calloway destruction wasn't isolated, but part of a systematic pattern. In 1958, when a real estate developer publicly used racial slurs during a zoning hearing, Bumpy waited 6 months before delivering tax fraud evidence to the ears and 3 newspapers simultaneously. The developer's company collapsed within 90 days. In 1961, a police captain who brutalized Harlem residents found 18 months of documented protection racket evidence delivered to Internal Affairs. He resigned before charges were filed, transferred to upstate obscurity. Bumpy chose systematic humiliation over physical brutality because he understood that for powerful men, loss of status was worse than death. Violence created martyrs who could be mourned and memorialized. Humiliation created ghosts, living men who wandered through ruins of their former importance, ignored by the world that once courted them. Official histories buried this story with deliberate efficiency. City archives contain no mention of Bumpy Johnson's role in Calloway's fall, attributing the resignation to generic corruption scandal without acknowledging that a Harlem numbers runner orchestrated the destruction. Admitting that reality would require officials to confess that power flowed through channels they couldn't control, that a man without title or office could end political careers with mathematical precision. Calloway's own memoirs, published in 1972, never mentioned Bumpy by name. He refers only to extortionist elements and criminal intimidation by unnamed figures who manipulated legitimate political processes. The language is bitter, vague, fundamentally dishonest. He couldn't admit the truth, that his own arrogance provided the ammunition for his destruction, that refusing to show basic respect triggered consequences he never imagined possible. The ultimate irony remains breathtaking in its simplicity. Calloway spent 30 years constructing a political dynasty through fundraisers, handshakes, and backroom deals. He built what he believed was an impregnable edifice of power. Yet it all collapsed because of one decision lasting 30 seconds, refusing to take a phone call from Harlem. That moment of casual arrogance triggered a mechanism that had waited 18 months to fire, destroying his marriage, career, reputation, and legacy in the time it takes a camera shutter to close. The mayor who thought he was untouchable learned what every person in Harlem already knew. Bumpy Johnson didn't need a title, an office, or a badge to command respect. He simply needed patience, preparation, and the understanding that every powerful man eventually provides the ammunition for his own destruction. You just have to be disciplined enough to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. In the end, respect isn't negotiable, it's mathematical. And mathematics, as Bumpy Johnson proved, is always exact. September 21st arrived gray and merciless, rain hammering courthouse windows like verdict announcements no appeal could overturn. Judge Theodore Whitman's chambers remained dark, his nameplate suddenly conspicuous in its abandonment. Court administrators scrambled to redistribute his docket while a bewildered substitute judge processed revised bail paperwork for one Ellsworth Johnson. Official explanations cited acute illness requiring immediate medical attention. The whispered reality circulating through courthouse corridors carried darker implications. Behind closed doors on the 8th floor, Whitman sat across from Chief Administrative Judge Lawrence Pemberton in a conversation that lasted exactly 12 minutes. No stenographer recorded their exchange. No clerk documented what passed between them. But courthouse staff observed Whitman emerging with the gray pallor of a man whose skeleton had been systematically removed. Pemberton's expression revealed nothing, though he immediately scheduled an emergency judicial review board meeting. The mathematics were brutal. Allegations involving underage girls and unlicensed establishments could not become headlines. The system protected itself first. Individuals never. September 23rd brought official announcement through carefully sanitized press release. Judge Theodore Whitman was resigning from the bench effective immediately, citing unspecified health concerns requiring extended treatment. 3 sentences buried on page 11 of the Times. No farewell ceremony. No colleagues offering public tributes. Just institutional erasure disguised as medical necessity. Personal destruction proceeded with terrifying efficiency. Margaret Kensington Whitman filed separation papers within 72 hours, citing irreconcilable differences while her family's private investigators delivered briefings about room 237 at the Riverside Hotel. By week's end, moving trucks evacuated the Park Avenue Co-op. She retreated with both sons to the family estate in Greenwich, where old money insulated against scandal through geographic distance and social amnesia. The boys were withdrawn from prep school under personal circumstances, though classmates already repeated rumors their parents pretended not to believe. Financial ruin followed with bureaucratic precision. Anonymous donations began appearing in mailboxes across Harlem. The widow whose husband Whitman sentenced to 20 years for street robbery. The mother of Marcus Williams. Families whose sons disappeared into prison on first offenses. Each payment traced back to accounts discreetly linked to Whitman's holdings. Properties were mortgaged, then quietly liquidated below market value. The Hamptons house, stock portfolios, everything converted to cash that vanished into restitution he never authorized but couldn't prevent. Someone with access to his financial infrastructure was systematically dismantling economic foundation, leaving bare subsistence while ensuring permanent descent from privilege.